superiority over the English Channel became crucial.
The Germans broke through the charge of Hurricanes and Spitfires that went out to meet them. 200 individual dogfights.
The Battle of Britain started on July 10th and climaxed in mid-September. Despite early German success, the tide of the air war would then turn.
The Battle of Britain was, in my view, the most significant battle to take place in Europe during the Second World War.
And on September 15th, he sent the Luftwaffe into one of its greatest attacks.
By losing that battle, Germany from that point on was clearly on a defensive against the Allies in the West. Britain became a huge, impregnable rock island aircraft carrier, if you will, from whence the Allies could mount a second front, an aerial second front, which they did very successfully.
By the end of October, the Spitfire had triumphed. The Luftwaffe had lost 1,600 planes damaged or destroyed.
And so we see then in the German air war, from that time on, there is this dramatic shift from offensive weaponry, which infuriates Hitler because he wants to build bombers and things to attack people, to having to build defensive systems simply to defend the skies of the Reich.
Hitler turned to his scientists and engineers, and belatedly to the jet fighter. He now knew that the hard-pressed Luftwaffe needed faster and more effective fighter planes. Heinkel's prototype 178 had been followed by the HE-280, which had made its first successful flight in the spring of 1941.
Quite clearly, you see in the 280 the genesis of the modern jet fighter. It has space for armament, space for sufficient fuel, a rugged structure, capable of undertaking the role of a combat fighter.
But only 9 HE-280s were ever built. The problem for Heinkel was that he had a rival, the company run by Dr. Willy Messerschmitt. They had competed throughout the war to equip the Luftwaffe. More often than not, it was Messerschmitt who won out.
Messerschmitt succeeds, first of all, with the Messerschmitt 109, the aircraft that we will always associate with the Battle of Britain, for example, and the early days of the Blitzkrieg. And then later on in the jet aircraft business, he succeeds very much with the Messerschmitt 262.
Messerschmitt had been developing his own jet fighter since 1939, but always seemed one step behind Heinkel. Then in late 1943, Messerschmitt got his break. Heinkel may have been first with the jet fighter, but Messerschmitt's 262 was superior, and Hitler approved the plane for mass production.
There was an intense rivalry, but always Messerschmitt kind of came out ahead in the fighter world. From the very beginning, it was clear that the Me-262 was a far better aircraft. Because of its engine installation, it was much faster than the Heinkel 280 also, and it had a much heavier armament. It was somewhat larger, a much longer range. So based on all of those factors, the Heinkel 280 was canceled.
Arguably, 3 years had been wasted since Heinkel's 280 first took to the air. But in 1944, the Nazi high command was confident that in the Messerschmitt, they had a plane that could dominate the skies. The big question was, had the best German engineers produced a machine that could win the war for Hitler? But the new obsession with speed brought its own problems. The old idea of jumping out of a plane with a parachute would no longer work in a stricken aircraft traveling at 500 miles per hour. To solve this, Hitler's engineers had to invent something new. In the past 50 years, it is calculated the ejection seat has saved the lives of more than 12,000 airmen. Since the end of the Second World War, all American aircrew have been taught how to escape from their plane in an emergency.
Oh, it's so fast that you hardly know what's hit you, but you know, it's a big kick in the butt.
But once again, this life-saving equipment was first invented by technicians working in Hitler's Germany. As the Luftwaffe tried to regain control of the skies over Europe using the new generation of faster aircraft, it became clear that the increased speeds presented German pilots with new dangers.
There's no question that as speeds got higher, ejection seats were necessary. But even before jet engines were fully implemented, high-speed piston engine aircraft were also being fitted with ejection seats.
The problem was, how could a pilot escape from a disabled plane that was traveling in excess of 500 miles per hour? Jumping out with a parachute strapped on the back was no longer an option.
If the pilot has to get out of that airplane, he is going to have a very difficult time indeed. One imagines him jettisoning the canopy of the aircraft and then clambering out of the airplane and trying to throw himself over the side. The aerodynamic forces can pin him inside the airplane, or they can carry him into other portions of aircraft structure. Now, you really do have to throw the pilot clear of the aircraft in some fashion.
Ernst Heinkel and his team of engineers were already grappling with the problem.
They thought, if he has to get out of the airplane, we better have some sort of catapult seat to throw him out. And this becomes, of course, as we say in the United States, the ejection seat.
In a museum near Frankfurt, Germany, are the remains of one of the first ejection seats ever to be used in battle. This one was fitted to Heinkel's propeller-powered Tu-19 Night Fighter.
First of all, you have to trigger a handle to remove the canopy. Thereafter, a quick release mechanism releases the compressed air into the cannon, drives the piston upward, and this drives the whole seat out of the cockpit. This took approximately 3 seconds to activate the system.
Luftwaffe pilot Otto Fries owes his life to this new equipment. Toward the end of the war, he was shot down at 8,000 feet over German territory. Blinded by blood in his eyes and with an engine on fire, he tried to pull the plane out of a dive.
Und dann dachte ich, kann doch nicht wahr sein.
And then I thought to myself, it can't be true. This cannot be the end. There has to be a solution. I couldn't think straight. All I knew was I had to get out using the ejection seat.
Dann kam ich durch Zufall.
Then, by chance, I found my flashlight, and I lit up everything and found here on this side a red flap.
Die rote Klappe.
And in my excitement, I immediately pressed the red button.
Meine Aufregung so.
And instead of leaning my head here and the feet down, I was simply shot out.
Und die Füße aus, ich bin einfach rausgeschossen worden. Dann habe ich also den Fallschirm.
I detached myself from the seat. Then I started tumbling.
Und als ich dann überschlug mich, überkugelte mich, und als ich dann.
And as I dived through the clouds again, I thought it is now time to pull the parachute cord. And the parachute opened, and I started to descend. Without an ejection seat, I would have been lost. In total, it is thought that the ejection seat saved the lives of over 60 German pilots in the last years of the war, vital at a time when experienced pilots were in short supply. But the technology that produced the jet engine and the ejection seat, which might have swung the war in Hitler's favor, came too late to save the Third Reich. For all its technical superiority, the Luftwaffe never mastered how to use the faster but less maneuverable jet fighter effectively.
When we take a look at Messerschmitt 262s in combat, we find that there was a much higher loss rate than the Germans actually should have experienced. They had thought about the technology, but they had not thought about the doctrinal or operational tactics under which they would be using this airplane.
More time might have helped the German high command, but it was the one thing Hitler did not have.
From 1944 onwards, Germany was not a master of its airspace at all. And it is to try to offset that we see this explosion of interest in Germany in building jet airplanes, building rocket-powered airplanes. Out of all of that, the only aircraft program that they can achieve in the short term that makes any sense at all is the Messerschmitt 262. But It simply came too late.
By 1944, when the Allies landed on the beaches of Normandy, it was 5 years since Ernst Haenkel first successfully tested his prototype jet engine. Despite its superior technology, Germany was now in retreat. Its air bases had been bombarded, and the Luftwaffe was forced to conceal its new fighter aircraft in forests and operate flights from autobahns.
They produced over 2,000 Me-262s, but they could only train a small number of pilots. So even with the best aircraft, highly trained pilots make a vast difference. They're almost as important as the actual aircraft they're flying.
We take a look at the history of aerodynamics in the 20th century and high-speed flight. Never did a country squander so great a technical advantage as Germany had.
Had Hitler trusted the new technology and opted sooner for the jet fighter, the course of the war, if not its outcome, might have been different. That was the problem with the Nazi attitude toward technological research. Some science thrived, especially if it advanced the Nazis' ideological aims. But much of it was delayed, or in some cases, dismissed.
Scientists, physicians, their professions were banned to them unless they supported the Nazi ideology.
We're more familiar with the cases where the Nazis actually suppressed science. They launched an attack on what was called Deutsche Physik, or German physics, and supported what they called Aryan physics against Jewish physics. On the other hand, other aspects of science were actually promoted. So it divides according to whether the Nazi regime thought this was a threat to Germany or was something that could be advanced to help the German race.
Although the legacy of German technology is all around us, it was this narrow and distorted view that prevailed during the Hitler years. It meant that much of the genius of German science at the time went unrecognized by the Nazis, thriving despite, rather than because, of fascist ideology.